Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint a Primera Space Marine in the style of the Raven Guard, ideal for your games of Warhammer 40,000. So the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice smooth, even base coat for the rest of our paints to work from. Now the first step I'm going to be doing is coming in with some Corvus black, and I'm going to paint all over the Space Marine. The reason I'm painting black over black is that Corvus black is a much lighter shade than the Chaos black spray. This will allow us to apply some shading and other details to the miniature, and also by painting with a paint from a pot, any mistakes that are made later on are easy to tidy up by coming back in with some Corvus black. So at this stage I'm just applying a couple of coats of Corvus black all over the Space Marine until I get a nice smooth, even coverage all over the model. You just want to make sure there's no blotchy areas, parts of the primer showing through. Just coat all of the Space Marine with some Corvus black. And after a couple of layers of Corvus black, you can see that I've got a nice smooth, even black colour all over the Space Marine. So now the first thing I'm going to paint is the marking on his shoulder pad. For this I'm using Mephiston Red. As this is a Raven Guard, I'm just painting the trim of the right hand shoulder pad. Just going to catch this with a couple of layers of Mephiston Red, obviously being really careful, trying not to get any of this over any of the black. But if I do, I can just tidy up with a little bit of Corvus black. So I just catch the rim with the Mephiston Red and leave all of the Corvus black on the inside of the shoulder pad. Depending on what company you're doing, you can change this colour to fit whatever company of Raven Guard you're painting. And with that shoulder trim picked out, it's added a pop of colour to our Raven Guard. So next thing I'm going to paint is all of the Aquillas, so the one on the chest and his bolt gun, and for this I'll be using Celestra Grey. I find Celestra Grey is a great base for areas that I want to be white later on. Gives us a nice just off-white colour, allows us to shade it and highlight up to a brighter white when needed. So for this I'm being really careful around all the black Power Armour, just making sure I pick out all of the details on the Aquila with a couple of coats of Celestra Grey till I build up to a nice solid just off-white colour all over that Aquila. Any mistakes can be tidied up with some Corvus black as well, so don't worry if you do make any slight mistakes, just tidy it back up once it's dried. And as well as the Aquila on his chest, I'm also getting the one on his bolt rifle here, just making sure I carefully paint this detail with some Celestra Grey. And with the Aquillas picked out, it's given a nice pop of white to our Raven Guard. The next detail I'm going to paint is the belt going around his waist. For this I'll use Rhinox hide to give us that brown sort of leather look to the belt. So I'm just going to apply a couple of layers of Rhinox hide to the belt going around his waist. I haven't put any pouches on this Space Marine. If you've built them with the pistol pouches, also catch these with the Rhinox hide as well. Just any pouches, straps, things like that, I'm just catching with some Rhinox hide. And with that Rhinox hide applied, the next detail I'm going to pick out is all of the metallics on the model. For this I'll be using Lead Belcher. And I'm just going to apply this to areas here like the muzzle to the gun. It's going to do the magazine housing, all of those sort of details. Going to pick out with a bit of Lead Belcher. Might take a couple of coats to get smooth, even coverage, but don't worry, just take your time, work carefully around all the other details. Just pick out everything we want to be metal with some Lead Belcher. Also picking out the vents on the backpack as well. So you've got the ones at the bottom and the larger ones at the top. I'm just making sure I pick out all of these nice and neatly with a couple of layers of lead belcher. With the metallics picked out, that's basically all of the base coats applied, but there's one last detail I'm going to do now. That's going to be to pick out the undersuit and some areas like that. For this, I'm going to use black Templar contrast paint. I'm actually going to do two things with this paint, but first of all, I'm going to paint this all over the areas of undersuit where this is a contrast paint. It's going to sink into the recesses of these details. Leave the tops a bit lighter, give us a nice shade and highlight in one go. As you can see, it's given us that nice effect all over the undersuit to the Space Marine. Now with some black Templar contrast paint again, I'm now going to apply this as a pin shade to all of the recesses on the Power Armour. You could use Nuln Oil for this step, but I find that the black Templar works really well for this job as well. Gives us a nice really dark shading into those recesses. It's nice and easy to control, so we can make sure we don't get any of this over the rest of the Power Armour. If you do come in a bit too thick at any point and get this over areas that you don't want to be shaded, it's really easy, just come back over with a bit of Corvus Black afterwards and tidy them up. But just make sure you work your way around the Power Armour, sinking this black Templar contrast paint into all of the recesses and panel lining all of the details on that Power Armour with some black Templar. So this is the only real shading we can do for black, coming in with a darker black. So make sure you take your time at this stage, just work your way around and recess shade all of the details to the Power Armour. And now with some Nuln Oil, I'm going to shade all of the rest of the base coats. So where we've got the Aquila on his chest here, I'm just shading that Celestra Grey with some Nuln Oil. I'm going to go all over the bolt gun, including the metallics, with some Nuln Oil. I'm not worrying about shading the red shoulder pad. That can stay a nice bright red colour. But for the rest of it, I'm just going to do an all over shade with Nuln Oil. So the belt, the metallics, the bolt gun, all of these details, just catch these with a shade of Nuln Oil.
If you enjoyed the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below.
And after all of those shades have dried, you can see how they've added definition all over our Raven Guard. All the details for the Power Armour really stand out now. So the next step is to start highlighting that Power Armour. And for this, I'm coming in with Mechanica Standard Grey first. And I'm going to apply this as an edge highlight to all of the panels on the Space Marine. And because it is quite hard to highlight black, really take your time at this stage. You don't want these to be too thick. However, you do want them to be large enough that we can come back in the next step and apply another edge highlight within these ones. So really try and keep control of the paint here. Keep it a nice even thickness as we work our way around all of the panels to the Power Armour, applying an edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey to all of the details. And a lot of people do get nervous when it comes to highlighting black, but I find that by doing this two-step approach, it does give a really good highlight to the armour, but still makes it read as black, but just with sharp edges reflecting the light. I'm coming in and applying this edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey, keeping it nice and smooth, nice and even as I work my way around all of the Power Armour. If at any point any of these are a little bit too thick or they go a bit wonky or anything like that, I can easily come back in afterwards with some Corvus Black again and neaten them out. But at this stage I'm just working my way around the Space Marine, applying an edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey to all of the details. Though some of the details on these Marines are quite small, if you don't feel comfortable highlighting an area, you can skip it, but I find that the more you can catch, the better looking the Power Armour you'll end up with. So really just take your time, work your way around the model, applying this edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey to all of the details on our Raven Guard Space Marine. Once that Mechanica Standard Grey highlight's been applied, you can see how it's picked out the edges of all of the details on the Power Armour. But now it's time to come in with another colour within that highlight. And for this I'll be using Dawnstone. It's a slightly brighter colour than the Mechanica Standard Grey, and the two work really well. Just give a really nice Power Armour to our Space Marine. So now, once again, just work your way back around the model. And wherever we applied some of the Mechanica Standard Grey, apply a small line of Dawnstone within that Mechanica Standard Grey, leaving a little bit of the previous colour showing through, so we get a nice transition from the black up to the grey for the highlight all over the Power Armour. So these steps are going to take a while, but as the armour is so much of the Space Marine, it really is worth taking the time on these details, really make the armour look as good as we can, and really make these Space Marines stand out when they're on the tabletop. So you can see I'm just working my way back around the Space Marine, applying the thin edge highlight of Dawnstone within the Mechanica Standard Grey I just applied at the previous step. So I want these highlights to be really small, just catching the very edges of all of the details. And that leaves that little bit of the Mechanica Standard Grey showing through and softens the transition between the colours. Just gives us a really nice highlight all over our Space Marine. Once again, any mistakes can be easily tidied up by just coming back in with a bit of Corvus Black again and re-highlighting the area. But by taking your time and just working in nice, smooth brush strokes, you should be able to highlight all the details to the Space Marine with a little bit of Dawnstone. With the edge highlight of Dawnstone applied, you can see how it really has brightened up that armour, made all the details pop. So now it's time to highlight the black casing to his bolt rifle. For this I'm going to use Eshin Grey. It's much darker grey than Mechanica Standard Grey and Dawnstone, so it'll just make the gun look a little bit different to the rest of the Power Armour. And for this I'm just applying a thin edge highlight around all the details on the casing to the bolt gun. So once again, take your time, just catch the edge of all of the details on the bolt rifle with a thin edge highlight of Eshin Grey. With all details, any mistakes can be easily tidied up if you need to, by keeping a nice even pressure on my brush and get nice smooth lines all over the bolt gun without obscuring any of the other details. The Eshin Grey applied, that is the bolt rifle highlighted and all of the black details on the model. So now it's time to move on to the eye lenses. For this I'll be using Mephiston Red to start. I'm going to sink this into the eye lenses to our Space Marine. This is going to give them glowing red eyes that's so iconic for Raven Guard. So I'm just sinking Mephiston Red into those eye lenses. And because of the scope on this bolt rifle, I'm also going to do the same to the scope. So I'm just catching the middle part with some Mephiston Red as well, so it will look like he's got a red scope on his bolt rifle. Now with some Wild Rider red, I'm going to place a really thin line at the very bottom of those eye lenses, keeping this line nice and small, just catching the very bottom with a thin line of Wild Rider red. And on the scope, I'm just going to do this sort of as a crescent moon shape, going from the bottom of one corner around, just to give the impression of light reflecting. And finally, with some white scar, I'm just going to add a small dot in the back corner of each of the eye lenses, keeping these spots nice and small, just applying them in the very back corner of those eye lenses and in the opposite corner of the scope lens to where we applied the Wild Rider red. With those eyes and the gun lens picked out, it's really added character to the model. There's actually only a few more details left to highlight. So next I'll be coming in with Mournfang Brown. I'm going to start highlighting the belt. So for this I just want to apply a chunky edge highlight going around the top and the bottom of the belt. With this so I can come in with another colour afterwards. Just applying a chunky edge highlight of Mournfang Brown at the top and bottom, which will really give the impression of leather on that belt. See, it's really brightened up that Rhinox hide. With one more edge highlight in that belt, it's going to give the impression of worn leather. And that other highlight is Steel Legion Drab. I'm just going to carefully apply a small line of Steel Legion Drab at the very top and bottom of the belt, leaving a bit of the Mournfang Brown showing through. This will give the impression of worn leather on the edges of the belt. With that belt highlighted, it's given a pop of colour in the middle of the Space Marine, broken up that black a little bit. So it's time to highlight the shoulder pad. And for this I'll be using Wild Rider red. I'm just going to apply an edge highlight to the very edge of that shoulder pad. So for these sharp points here, you can use the side of your brush. It'll just give you a nice smooth, even edge highlight just at the very edges of the shoulder pad trim. So wherever possible, I always try and use this trick of the side of my brush to give nice, even highlights. And with those shoulder pads highlighted, there's only a few details left to highlight now on the model. The next one of these will be the white Aquilas on his chest and gun, and for that I'll be using White Scar. Just going to catch all of the raised details on the Aquila. So I want to catch the raised parts to the skull, all of the feathers, making sure I leave some of that Celestra Grey and the Nuln Oil shade showing through. So just being really careful, just catching the very tips of all of those feathers with an edge highlight of White Scar. Doing the same to the one on the bolt rifle as well. Just catching all of the raised details with a thin edge highlight of White Scar. And finally, with some Stormhost Silver, I'm going to highlight all of the metallic details. So for this, I'm just applying a small edge highlight to the very tips and sharpest points of any of the metallic details on the model. This just gives the impression of light catching off the metal. Just add a final pop of brightness to our Raven Guard Space Marine. So just catch all of the metallic details with an edge highlight, Stormhost Silver. and with the silver details highlighted, that is how to paint a Raven Guard Space Marine for Warhammer 40,000. So please let me know in the comments down below, are there any other Space Marine chapters you would like to see me paint? But thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, an extra special thank you to Jenkins, our Tea Lover channel member. Thank you so much for the support, and happy painting!